Okay, welcome to the In My Beach Boys Room podcast. I am Adam Schreiner, sitting here with Matthew Hartz, and I think now in our season finale here, I might be graduated to a different title than a casual Beach Boys fan.
You know what? After having a few discussions with you the last couple of weeks as we've been getting ready for these things, I'm sure that you've graduated.
I mean, we're not talking like high school graduate. I'm thinking kindergarten graduation.
I don't know.
Going to first grade.
Elementary school.
Going into junior high now.
Yeah,
it's still a big deal. So this is going to be the last episode of the season, and we're going to talk about Carl and his story.
And I'm going to do kind of a condensed history there too, and we might touch on a few things I've already touched on in episodes, but just bear with me, folks, because there is a lot of new stuff in
some new material
episode.
That'll be there. Okay.
But some of it had to be touched on just to tell the story.
So let's talk about the future of the In My Beach Boys Room podcast, which we got our next season, which will continue to carry on what we've been doing, the condensed history into the 70s.
Yes, because it will, we don't know how long our break is going to be, but the Feel Flows box set gets released on July 30th, and the history that we're doing is going to be, that's right at the point we're stopping. So it will be perfect for us to start telling that history story there, along with the Feel Flows box set getting released.
Totally. Yeah. The timing will be perfect.
Yeah. And I definitely want to continue with the condensed history and pretty much try to cover to the end of the important part of their career. But there's also going to be special episodes in the next season, and there's going to be some cool guests too.
Yeah, we've got some momentum, we've got some attention, and so some people are noticing that, and they want to be a part, and they actually excited to be a part of it, which is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I'll talk about this gentleman later on in this episode, but a dear friend and hero of mine on the fiddle, Larry Franklin, is going to be a guest.
Yeah, that's super cool. And so we'll have some guests. We'll continue on with the history. But in the meantime, if you want to get some of the In My Beach Boys Room podcast type material, go over to our YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the little bell notification, because we're going to Matthew's probably going to throw some covers up.
Some more covers and some song breakdowns.
Some breakdowns, teaching how to play certain Beach Boys tunes and that sort of thing. So if you need to get your fix, hop over to YouTube and subscribe. And then also, obviously, Matthew Hart's Music is the channel, and then we have Matthew Hart's Music as our Instagram, Matthew_Hart's as Twitter, and then the Facebook page, which has blown up a little bit since you've started that.
Well, I got a personal page started back on there that's just going to have a lot of podcast stuff on it. And that's, for right now, that's what we've got Facebook-wise. But
yeah, just look up Matthew Hart's.
Find the Beach Boys stuff. Find the little kid with the banjo.
Yeah, the little kid with the banjo, that's his picture, because there's obviously other Matthew Hart's that exist in the world. So with that being said, I think we covered everything. Thank you guys so much for listening, and girls, and we really appreciate it. We got through this first season, and if you want to support the podcast, we have our Patreon page, of course, as well. So let's talk about Carl Wilson, and take it from here.
Okay, well, this is a special episode for me, man. Carl Dean Wilson. Carl Dean, Dennis was Dennis Carl.
So,
yeah,
interesting. So they had each other's names.
Yeah, I've always thought that was strange. So Dennis was second, right? And after Brian, and his name was Dennis Carl, and so the next son first name is the same as the previous son's middle name. So a little unorthodox.
So I'm sorry, what was Brian's middle name then?
Douglas.
Brian Douglas.
But I think Audrey had a brother named Carl, where a lot of that comes from.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, he was the baby of the three Wilson brothers. And I think even in childhood, he exhibited the sweetest, softest side of the boys. Always kind of stayed out of the way. When Brian and Dennis were kind of getting into their stuff with Murray, Carl stayed out of the way of that too, and learned how to be a diplomat at a very young age, which served him well in the Beach Boys going forward. But he just really had that sort of personality from the get-go. His early music stuff, just much the same as Brian and Dennis. He gets the piano knowledge from Murray and Audrey, and has the early family singing that was going on with all three boys. Even before Brian was into his four freshmen kick, there was a tune that Brian and Dennis and Carl sang together in their bedroom. Brian says a lot, and they would learn to harmonize together. It's called "Come Down from the Ivory Tower." It's just an old, I guess, sort of a folk tune, but they developed that singing together, lying in bed together at night.
Interesting. Kind of cool.
Yeah. Another thing about Carl's early history musically is he was inspired by a fiddle player.
Oh, well, look at that.
Yes. The man's name was Spade Cooley, and he was a band leader from, I think, Los Angeles. But we've talked about Western swing being a big part of my history in Texas, and Bob Wills, the man who started that there, and that Johnny Lee Wills recorded a Murray Wilson's, well, anyway, Spade Cooley was kind of the Hollywood version of the Western swing bands, and he had a famous band and a TV show, and Carl loved that thing. And I think there's even a picture someplace, maybe I've just heard of a picture of Carl with his foot on a stool wearing a cowboy hat, pretending like he's playing a fiddle, or maybe playing a toy fiddle or something like that. So kind of a neat thing, you know. I just know that he was inspired by him and probably liked it, Yeah,
and you know a lot about the
Spade Cooley. Yes, I know.
With your background?
I don't know as much about him as I know the Texas guys in Western swing, like Bob Wills. But I know a little bit, and I've done some Spade Cooley music.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Really cool.
That's a really cool name.
Yeah.
I mean, Spade Cooley. I mean,
yeah.
come on.
Unfortunately,
not a cool guy.
Yeah, I think he got convicted of murder.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, sorry.
Gosh.
Anyway, let's get off of that.
Yeah,
for a
let's
second.
move on
Okay.
quickly.
Boom.
Okay, back.
Condensed
Yeah,
history
yeah,
of Carl Wilson.
Yeah.
So, Carl talks about in interviews about him being about 8 years old when Brian got into the Four Freshmen and started dissecting the records. And that puts Brian about, I think, 12 or whatever. And so Brian was trying to figure out those arrangements, and he needed human voices, and he could get Audrey to sing with him. Dennis, I think, would sing sometimes, besides the singing in the bedroom, but really wasn't a regular part of some of that activity in the younger years. So he was called upon to learn these basically, jazz harmony vocal parts at 8 years old. And he says he learned how to do it very quickly because he wanted to go outside and play.
Yeah, motivation, right?
Yeah. And I know I heard him say that on a TV show in 1976 the first time, and I thought that was really funny.
Yeah.
I had to sing with Brian because my mom made me sing with Brian.
Right. Yeah, totally. It's like chores for all other kids. It's chores to go out and play, but him, it's music.
Yeah. So the guitar comes along for Carl around 12, I think, is what I can figure out. And most of that's listening to David Marks and talking about him and Carl taking lessons together when David was 10 and Carl was 12 from a guy named John Maus, M-A-U-S, who just was down the street basically from them in Hawthorne. I mean, maybe further than just down the street, but he actually went on to become famous as a group with a group called the Walker Brothers, I think, or something. Just another random thing that their local guitar teacher ended up, going on to get some notoriety too,
Right.
But he and Carl and David started taking lessons from this guy, and he taught them a lot of the techniques that he was doing at the time. There's a particular arpeggiated picking thing that they learned on the ballads and the strumming on the ballads, and a lot of the lead playing that's just basically around the, it's the basic pentatonic stuff that every rock and roll guitar player learns how to do, but all of their early knowledge, came a lot from that guy helping him out. But Carl and David, and even Brian and Mike too, but I'm just kind of talking about the context of Carl here. Heavy Chuck Berry fans.
Oh, nice.
Heavy duty Chuck Berry fans. I mean, any kid playing the guitar back then. I mean, we've got to give Chuck his due here, and he's the real king of rock and roll. Without him, we don't have the guitar style that still to this day just it's what you do if you play rock and roll guitar. So they were big Chuck Berry fans, and he and David would learn the tunes off the records, and learn the solos off the records as best that they can, along with the lessons they were getting from John Moz. So, and Carl's first guitar, I think, is the K hollow body acoustic electric that is used on the Surfin' single, but I don't know when he got that guitar, but I'm just assuming that this is the guitar that the lessons are being taken on.
Is that part of this? Do you have that one?
Do I have what?
That guitar?
Oh no, I don't have a. No, I have a guitar that's like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, as part of the early part of the display for the Beach Boys' very earliest stuff, I have that stand-up bass, and then I have a couple of archtop guitars. One of them that looks exactly like a silver tone that David had early on.
Okay.
So they're kind of guitars to represent that.
Yeah. And I think you explained that to me when you were walking me through everything. Okay.
Right. So he gets pretty good on the guitar, because he starts playing at school at assemblies with Brian. Al talks about seeing Brian and who's that kid playing the guitar, the young kid, wow, that's pretty dang good, and it was Carl, but Al didn't know at the time. He's like, who is that kid? He kept on thinking, well, this is all good, but who is that kid on the guitar?
Yeah.
So first single, the Beach Boys get going. That story we have told a bunch of times, right? But we need to talk about Carl's part in it and how old he was when that happened. 14 when they recorded that.
Yeah.
And he's basically the only kind of legit musician in the band that's been taking lessons. Not, I guess... Yeah, really, and Al even kind of says it that way, too, even though Al's playing the other significant part, being the stand-up bass on that. It's amazing. It's the tone of his guitar on that record. I just always wondered what it was until someone told me that it was a unplugged archtop guitar. And I thought, oh, well, that's why that sounds like that. But his style on that first record, the way he's picking that, is a completely different thing than what they quickly morphed into for the Surfin' Safari album or the tunes that came after the first single. It's almost like he was playing in more of a kind of a folk style. People have hypothesized whether or not at that point the Beach Boys weren't like thinking, oh, are we going to go more folk like Al with the stand-up bass, or are we going to go the Chuck Berry route? Like
at that point,
and then when Al left, maybe that the default was go this week.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that would make sense.
So the style that Carl plays on that Surfin' record is just really unique, and I've tried to mimic it and try to figure out exactly what he's doing. Of course, the recording, the fidelity of the recording in its best version is sketchy, so it's hard to hear what's really going on. But it just amazes me at 14 years old that what he basically did is organically came up with something that worked.
Right.
I did so much of the Wilson brothers was just what has to be done.
Totally.
And the Beach Boys, as Al and Mike too. So then after the first Surfin' single, then they switched to the Stratocasters and the Jaguars, and all of a sudden we're through amplifiers, and now the rhythm parts are more like Chuck Berry power chords, more moving in that direction, and it's all done very well as far as I'm concerned. Those first couple of albums, that's Carl and David at 15 and 13, playing those guitars
Mm-hmm.
and kicking butt, keeping time, feel. Just really, really, really blows my mind. And check out on YouTube, if you look up Surfin' Safari and put 1962, and there's a version that's been colorized, and I think that's a little bit more interesting to look at. They're wearing their Pendletones, but Carl, let's see, 62, I guess he is 15 or 16 in that picture, in that film. Very subdued. It's funny to watch a young Carl Wilson at that point, at the very beginning of their career, confidently doing what he's doing, but in a very quiet way. And
Mm-hmm.
so young compared to all those guys, kind of wondering what's going on. And then we need to talk about Carl's musicianship and his growth in the first couple of years. I mean, it's pretty amazing as a guitar player. On the first 3 albums, he's doing all the solos, and they aren't groundbreaking solos. They're not real tough, but they are done so well. They've got such great feel and such great touch. It really does not sound like a kid that's 15 years old or
Yeah.
however old he was doing it. It's just really amazing what he did, both as a lead guitar player and as a rhythm guitar player through the next couple of years. And I want people to fast forward on their video checkouts now to the 1964 Tammy show that the Beach Boys played, and there's wonderful footage of that. And on this, Carl is playing his brand new Rickenbacker 36012, and they're playing Surfin' USA, Surfer Girl, I Get Around, and Dance, Dance, Dance. And on the 3 fast tunes, he's playing a solo on the Rickenbacker. Now, I can tell you, as a guitar player who's played Rickenbackers and knows what it's like to switch from playing those solos on the Fender Jaguar to going to playing them on the Rickenbacker. A Rickenbacker 36012 is a wonderful guitar, but you need to know how to handle it. It's a different instrument. You have to use your hands in different ways to make it happen right. And so I look at that footage of him in 1964, and those are the solos and all the licks that he plays from I Get Around and Dance, 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 all the parts. And there's modulations in those tunes because, I Get Around, he's playing those hard riffs and moving on the Rickenbacker, doing all of that stuff so well.
So is this
Maybe I'm just biased, but I'm not, and I have the perspective of being a music
yeah, totally.
instructor and a musician for so long that he just, for him to, and he just did so much confidence. And then think, even in 1964, he's only 18 years old. He's only playing 6 years, and he's doing that on a stage in front of the Rolling Stones were at that show. Chuck Berry was at that show.
So would you consider it like Prodigy level, or because you said it's not the craziest solos, but the way he does it, does that put him in this like sort of like, would you look at him at this point and say Prodigy type level?
I don't look at any of the 3 Wilson brothers as prodigy musicians. On their instruments so much as what we think of with prodigy musicians that we're dealing
what they
with.
Can do.
Yeah, it's their technical prowess on the instrument. What I think that all 3 were just musical geniuses and carpenters that
could feel, right? Is what you said.
Well, feel, but then just a natural. Their ears were so fantastic that they all wrote fantastic music and interpreted fantastic music so well.
Okay.
That's where I think that they were prodigies.
Got it.
And
Okay.
they're all multi-instrumentalists. All 3 of those, I think Dennis and Carl are better piano players than Brian.
Right.
Anyway, we kind of got
No,
off.
I know. I just wanted to. I actually had that question kind of, but you were on a roll, so I didn't want to interrupt. But I was curious of kind of how you were, how you were describing it, if it was. But thank you for giving me the explanation or a description of what you. Or I'm sorry. Thank you for giving me a definition of what when people think Prodigy, what they think of. So okay,
You bet.
moving on.
Also, at this time, Carl already is considered the band leader on the road.
And I'm sorry, where?
Even when Brian is he is considered the guy that counts the songs off, keeps everybody together, makes sure that everybody's playing the right parts. And interestingly enough, there are existing contracts for their performances in 1964, and most of them will say for Carl Wilson and 4 musicians.
Oh, wow.
Meaning leaving the door open. It could be you get a David and an Al and a Mike, but the contracts are for Carl Wilson and 4 musicians.
Wow, that's saying something.
Yeah, that's
pretty big.
Kind of inside knowledge.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Cool. So we're gonna get beyond those early years and talk about 65 and 66 for Carl, because this is the period that really saw him blossom as a singer, and where he really started being known for his singing. In 65, on summer days and summer nights, he did the lead vocal on Girl Don't Tell Me. And for years, the books and even some of the liner notes would say that this is Carl's first lead vocal on a Beach Boys album. And it doesn't say that on the back of the album, but all the books were saying that. And I was pretty positive he was singing lead on Pom Pom Playgirl on Shutdown Volume 2 the previous year, which, come to find out, it is right that he had that lead. And
so that was his first lead?
And I always suspected, but Jim Murphy's book has confirmed it, and I think I've seen it another place too. I always suspected on the very first album they do a cover of Eddie Cochran's Summertime Blues, and I think that's Carl and David singing as a duet, which
So wait, confirmed or still unconfirmed?
I think that is confirmed. I think I've seen it in 2 different spots.
2 different sources.
But I thought for years I saw that lead vocal listed as Brian and Mike, and there is no way in hell. And I think it's Carl and David. I thought, and then I know that I've seen that other places. So what I'm trying to get at with that is Beach Boy historians were wrong, thinking that Girl Don't Tell Me was the first time he had a lead vocal. So that's my funny little thing right there. 66 especially was a huge year for Carl and lead vocals, because that's when you have his defining moments in Beach Boy history. You have Brian asking him to sing God Only Knows on Pet Sounds, and then also he gets the lead vocal in Good Vibrations.
Yeah.
And that pretty much
seals the deal right there, right?
Yeah. These are the first examples and reasons that he would become known as one of the greatest singers in rock history.
Yeah, that's pretty.
And there are so many people, and I can't name them all. I was sitting here yesterday and today, so I'm trying to think of more blatant examples. But Elton John comes to mind as just being gushing when it comes to talking about Carl and his not just singing but everything about Carl. But also Christopher Cross. Are you familiar with Christopher Cross? The song "Sailing Takes Me Away Where I'm Going."
Oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah,
one.
okay. Sorry guys for that. That was just Christopher
Cross. That was for me mostly.
Christopher Cross. You talk about a singer,
right?
And just the theme from Arthur too was a movie in the late 70s, I think. And he had a lot of great stuff. He talks. Right after Carl died, he did a live album, and before he did a song called "Think of Laura," he dedicated it to Carl and told the entire audience that Carl Wilson was the single greatest influence on his vocal styling, and he thought he was the greatest singer.
Wow.
And that's 2 examples of a lot. You're going to get a lot of people that love Carl singing, and he sang on a lot of people's records in the 70s too. The other Beach Boys did too, but people wanted Carl. Elton John wanted Carl on "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me," and Chicago wanted the Beach Boys, and
Wait, did they? Did the Beach Boys get on those records or no?
Oh yeah.
Oh, they're on them?
Yeah.
Oh wow. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of those. Yep, and there's just so many people that cite him as a mentor and a hero, as a singer, just as a singer. You know. Okay, so after Brian's collapse, basically during Smile, Carl started taking more responsibility in the studio. So this is '67, right? Where he had already been Brian's interpreter on stage. And what I mean by that, he was running that live band. And he had to make sure that the important parts from the records were being represented live, So, helping to come up with, who needed to play what, the Beach Boys were going out on the road as a 6 or 7 piece band trying to represent music on Pet Sounds that was played by 23 musicians.
Right.
And so you got a lot going on, and so there's some decisions to be made about what needs to go on for those live arrangements, and I know Carl had a lot to do with that, and also made sure that they were all done right, that everything was just right. Al talks about Carl being that conscience on stage that just made sure that everything was just right. So he had already been the interpreter on stage, and now he was shifting into being the interpreter in the studio because Brian didn't want to be as involved with that as he had been. So the late 60s and the 70s, all the 70s, the powerful work that the Beach Boys did, most of it was largely done under Carl's supervision somehow.
Powerful, when you say powerful,
just all the great records that
gotcha.
even the
that I
Wild
haven't,
Honey,
learned
Friends,
about yet.
2020.
Oh no, okay, all those.
He was starting to shift into that role, and shouldering some of it with some of the other guys at times. But Carl was really in that transitional phase to where he was going to be the kind of the main voice in the studio. But so they did a lot of great work with the great singles, great tunes. I have to make special mention because of that Feel Flows box set coming out. Feel Flows, Long Promised Road off the Surf's Up album, and then a lot of great Carl Wilson tunes. But for me, a real special one is the one we opened the episode with, Trader from the Holland album. Carl was a great writer, and I love his piano style on these tunes and other tunes from the early 70s of the Beach Boys stuff. Carl played piano live a lot in the early 70s with the Beach Boys, was switching to an electric both all those. They're just what I call musical omnivores.
Yeah, they can just hop around anywhere.
Yeah, but Billy Hinchy, his brother-in-law, which we're going to talk a little bit more about him because we need to, talks about how he thought Carl had incredible feel on the piano. They just had basic piano knowledge from their full. We talked about that, and it's just what they had. It's more about their feel than anything. It didn't matter if they were playing a piano or a guitar or, throwing rocks.
Yeah, totally.
The early 70s were a special live time for me. The 1973 In Concert album, which is a collection of shows from 72 and 73, is my favorite live period of the Beach Boys. They are a rockin' band, and if you play that album for people, a lot of the cuts, and if it's not one of the hit early tunes, like it's one of the later tunes, most people would never guess it's the Beach Boys. They rock heavy duty. And Carl had met in England 2 South African musicians, I think in 69 or 70, named Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fattar. And he loved their band and their musicianship, and they were actually asked to join the Beach Boys in the early 70s. Not just touring musicians, they were official members.
Oh, wow.
So these Blondie Chaplin, who is a rockin' guitar player.
So when you say official members, you mean like they consider like a Beach Boy? Or
yes. At the back of the In Concert album and the back of Holland features pictures of Blondie and Ricky alongside Brian, Dennis, Carl,
Cool.
So they were considered actual Beach Boys.
Cool.
And another curious thing about that people often overlook, it's another case of the Lily White Beach Boys being one of the first bands to integrate because they were both black musicians.
Oh.
Yeah. And Blondie Chaplin is just a screaming musician, mainly guitar player. But one of his gigs recently, besides coming back and playing with Brian and Al a lot, is singing with the Rolling Stones on tour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
So we're talking about some heavy hitters.
Yeah,
And then
yeah, no
Ricky
kidding.
Fattar, the drummer, who also played many other instruments, including steel guitar, but went on to play with Elton John and Joe Walsh of the Eagles. I mean, lots of people, but just they added an element of muscle to that early 70s show. Besides, Carl had his guitar processed dirtier, and so did Al. So it's almost like, even Surfing USA is distorted. It just sounds, I love it.
Nice.
And the other musicians that they toured with at that time, I want to make special mention of Ed Carter because his bass playing makes that album, and he was such a huge part of the whole history of those touring Beach Boys during those years, and a lot longer than that. Carly Munoz, the great keyboardist, Billy Hinchy, Carl's brother-in-law, who we're still going to talk a little bit about. Carl is the obvious leader of this band of rockin' musicians too. He is running the show. He was the guy that selected the tracks from all the stuff they recorded for that and mixed all that live album down and put that rockin' thing out too. So that's another feather in his cap as far as I'm concerned, because I love that live record. When Brian came back in the mid-70s, Carl was, as you'd expect him to be, so helpful and encouraging. But this is a special case. Brian trying to get reintegrated in the mid-70s, and Dennis and Carl both, wanting the best for their brother, tried to help in so many ways, so many times at that time.
Right.
It took a special hand to help. And to be able to bring Brian back into the fold and get him to work a little bit, record, and even go out on the road, and
Sure.
So he did a good job of that, but he also did it while taking a big back seat because he had been in control up until 75 of, him and the other guys too. I don't want to discount Dennis and Al and Mike and Bruce, but I think Carl's the main guy for sure. And in order to let Brian come in after that absence and not really even knowing what the industry was like because he'd been in bed and just out of touch for so long, and Carl just had to there were some things that Carl and Dennis weren't happy with that Brian produced that they wished maybe he would have tried a little bit harder on, but
Sure.
in the end, they kind of had to, they did everything out of love for Brian, I'm sure. And so the album that comes after 15 Big Ones, the Love You album, Carl is listed as mixed down producer, but he helped Brian make that whole thing. And that it's another labor of love where you could, Carl just putting his name on that record. It's such a strange record, especially for when it was released, but that's to me, it shows how much that brother loves that brother.
Right. Absolutely.
All of the Beach Boy albums from this point till when Carl passes, anything that gets released, Carl Wilson is a highlight of. His singing or whether it's his leads or his harmonies, he's always featured. I can Kokomo when had the massive thing with that in 88. A big part of it is Carl's hook in the middle of it. But he's always, from here to the end of his life, if anything happens Beach Boy wise, Carl is a big highlight. Not just his singing, he wrote some great tunes in the late 70s too that showed up on the LA Light album specifically, and then I love the stuff on Keeping the Summer Alive that he wrote too. He was known as the soul of the Beach Boys. I heard that. I thought that, then I heard someone else say it. I saw it written down, and then I don't know how many years ago this man wrote this book now, but it is wonderful. His name's Kent Crowley, and he wrote this biography of Carl called Long Promised Road, and subtitled Carl Wilson, Soul of the Beach Boys. I would just add to that I think the heart and soul of the Beach Boys. And that's not to diminish what Mr. Crowley said. And this is a wonderful book. It's one of the best Beach Boy books I've ever read.
Wow.
And so
that's bold coming from you.
Yeah, I think really do. And there's also a couple interviews of him on the internet talking about writing the book and doing the interviews that I found really engaging. He's a very humble man. So anyway, yeah, I think the heart and soul of the Beach Boys. Carl was an amazing human being. Not perfect. Everybody has weaknesses and weak moments, and he had those things. But he was absolutely the example of a kind, loving, empathetic human being that everybody should strive to be, treating everybody the same. There's legendary stories in Beach Boy world about how Carl knew everybody's names, all the kids of all the, he and made a point to make everybody feel special.
Oh,
Cool. He's a very spiritual person too. He had the meditation stuff early on during the Friends period, and he kept on with the meditation through the 70s, but then he got involved with another particular movement that's based around the same energy and stuff like that. That he was a practitioner of that type of spirituality till the end of his life, and it really guided him. I know that. I always use him as an example of who to be. If
you want to strive to be someone?
Well, if I'm trying to resist the asshole in myself, sometimes I will.
What would Carl do?
Yeah, exactly. That. What would Carl Wilson be this person?
That's why it's a special episode to you, because you really look up to him, not just as a musician, but as a person.
Oh yeah, and he's special. The other guys resonate with that way with in some ways too, but Carl is extra special. I want to make mention of his two boys, Jonah and Justin, because I think they're so cool and they seem to carry his spirit. Justin's a great musician and has had some really cool stuff. He performs with one of Dennis's sons, or had a band with one of Dennis's sons.
Oh, that's cool.
And but they are really seem to be chips off the old block. Just that same steady softness of Carl. One of the last projects that Carl did in the mid '90s was the Stars and Stripes project that the Beach Boys got together with a bunch of country artists. Brian was involved too. They got him involved. He wanted Willie Nelson if they could get Willie Nelson. And Willie Nelson came in and did Warmth of the Sun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so Brian got involved with the project, and it was produced by a guy named Joe Thomas, who figures heavy into Brian's and the Beach Boys' history going forward from here. But it was an album of Beach Boy covers with lead vocals done by country artists. Lori Morgan doing Don't Worry Baby. There's a lot of good stuff on there. But I have a dear friend named Larry Franklin, who is a hero of mine from the fiddle world. His dad was a real hero of mine down in Texas too. And Larry is not only a great Texas-style old-time fiddle player, but he played with the famous Western swing band Asleep at the Wheel. And he now plays with the Time Jumpers in Nashville with Vince Gill on a regular basis, and has been really heavily involved in session work. And I'm just assuming that was the connection that got him involved with Stars and Stripes. And so I think it was when I saw the documentary that came out and I saw the video of the Beach Boys playing at Fanfare in Nashville, and I saw Larry on stage with them, and I couldn't believe it. And
so, wait, there was what documentary are you talking about?
It was a Stars and Stripes a documentary about the making of that album that came out in the
okay.
mid '90s. I think on the Disney Channel originally.
And so you
And I knew it was coming out.
and you knew Larry at this time.
Oh yeah, I'd
and
known
so when you
Larry for
saw
years.
him,
And then I see him on stage
Oh,
playing with the Beach Boys. And,
cool.
and so I think it was basically, probably the next day I called him and said, "What in the world, man?" You know?
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh, that's right. I forgot you were a Beach Boys fan." We'd known each other, but not for a terribly long time, probably at that point. And he was telling me a little bit about it. And I think I might have asked him. I said, "Well, what was Carl like?" Because I figured he goes, "Oh my gosh." He said he was so awesome to work with. He was, affirmed that he was a leader. He said, and he seemed to really dig my fiddle playing. I mean, he kept on turning around in rehearsals or like performance and smiling at me. And I go, "Well, Larry, I know why that is." And he goes, "Why?" And I said, "Because I said, Carl was a Spade Cooley fan when he was a kid." And that was Larry.
Right.
This is my quote from Larry. He says, "Matt, you know way too much about the Beach Boys." Yeah. So this was this was on a phone call, right?
Yeah. Fast forward 25 years doing a podcast. Here we are.
Yeah, and so that was a pretty cool moment. And then we're going to talk about this later on in another episode, but Larry went on to play on Brian's solo album Imagination because of the Stars and Stripes connection later on in 1998. So he got to work with Brian on that. So we'll talk about that because Larry's going to be a guest next season.
Yeah, I mean, if you have that relationship, might as well get him on here.
Yeah, some of the interviews that Carl did for that Stars and Stripes documentary are, looking back, are so poignant because they're some of the last things he did before he passed away.
Oh, okay.
It's really worth looking up that stuff just to see his, he says it has such a gentle way of speaking and he's so calming. It's really, really, really nice. People should look those things up. When he passed away in 1998, I remember it was very impactful to me. Dennis was impactful, but I was in junior high when that happened. I remember seeing it in People magazine is where I heard about Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
But Carl, it was on the internet, in the infancy of the internet. And, Dennis, when that happened, that was sad in 1983. I had seen the Beach Boys just a few years before that in Pocatello and then Salt Lake City. And so I got to see all the guys while they were still alive.
Right.
I think how cool that was for my early.
Yeah, a lot of people will probably give a lot to be able to say they did that.
Yeah, well, like I say, Dennis was sad, but this in 1998, I mean, this really is kind of the death of the Beach Boys.
Oh, really?
If you look at it from a standpoint of there's no longer Wilson brothers involved with the touring group.
Because Brian's not.
Yeah,
he's alive, but he's not touring. Yeah,
doing his separate things.
Right,
and,
right.
There's a lot of different reasons. If people don't understand why all that goes on, there's lots of different reasons why, the touring groups are the way that the touring groups are. But it's just like Al says in Endless Harmony. It's hard to imagine the Beach Boys without Carl Wilson's voice.
Right. Yeah.
In whether it's in the harmony blend or whatever, it's just he was just such.
He's just too much.
He was the anchor.
Yeah.
He was the anchor of everything. It's just like people don't realize how much of the feeling and the sound of the Beach Boys
is coming
was perpetuated from Carl.
Sure.
And just his beautiful singing. The really cool thing is in the wake of his passing, Jonah and Justin, his sons, who I got to make special mention of here because I got to meet them both at an event I'm going to talk about here in a second, but just wonderful human beings. But they got together with Uncle Billy Hinchy. I'm going to take this moment right now to talk about Billy because I don't think we've done enough of that during the entire podcast series. He was Carl's brother-in-law, Carl's first wife, Annie, the boys' mom, was Billy's her brother. Anyway, Billy went on to tour with the Beach Boys starting in the early 70s, and for a long time, a very important musician in their history. And he also did a lot of filming in the late 60s and the early 70s. A lot of a lot of the footage that we have is courtesy of Billy, because he was smart enough to get some of that stuff done, and he's made some amazing documentaries about being on the road with the Beach Boys in 1974, and then another one about Carl called Here and Now, I think. Um, he Billy is still doing amazing. He does a show called Live from Billy's Place that I want to check out more. I've just found out a little bit about it, but he's still out there pumping it for the Beach Boys and spreading the love.
That's awesome.
When I was learning how to play piano when I was in college, Billy put out it was a company called Homespun Videos, and they did a lot of bluegrass stuff. So I knew of the homespun stuff because of the fiddle world. Well, I'm looking through a catalog one day, and it says "Learn to Play Beach Boy Classics" by Billy Hinchy. Forward or introduction by Carl and Audrey Wilson. Well, that didn't get ordered in like a half a second, and
Yeah.
that's going to show up in another episode because I've got all the stuff from that. But I learned so much about Brian's chord voicings and how to correctly play those piano parts from Billy's video. He's just obviously knows so much about it, and he's a brilliant pianist, guitar player, singer, did so many things. But he and Carl were very close, very, very, very close, even after Carl got divorced from Annie in the late 70s. But Jonah and Justin and Billy started the Carl Wilson Foundation, and they started having events, I think very, very, very shortly, maybe even the same year Carl passed away. And it was a big deal where people would get together like a convention style, but they ended up having a walk, called the Carl Wilson Walk for Cancer, and then would have a big concert with some big names and lots of events through a kind of a weekend sort of a deal. So I think I had heard about it and thought, man, that would be a cool thing to go to. Well, either in 99 or early like 2000 sometime, it was on the internet. We got to remember the internet back then is not the same internet. It took days to load pages. If you went to a website.
Yeah. Oh no, we all remember those times.
Yeah, and so I can't remember which site it was on, but they had a Carl Wilson trivia contest. And sure, I'm sitting back in my office at my music store. Oh, I'll get in on this. Answer the questions, and might have been a couple weeks later, someone called me, and they said, I still don't know if I won or if I got second. Okay, because it's really hard to explain that situation. But anyway, they had told that I had won something. That's great. And there are two ladies involved. I think one's name was Betty Calignan, and then Sherry Scaines is the other gal, I think. And one of them called me to inform me that, you only missed one question, and wow, that's amazing, and so, I told me I'd won something. And I don't know if I didn't pay attention or what, but I promise I didn't. I don't think I heard what I should have heard.
Yeah.
Because a few weeks later, a manila envelope arrives at the music store and has an anonymous return address of Los Angeles, California on it. And it's addressed to me in care of Heart's Music Shop, blah, 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 And it looked like something that I get from distributors all the time. It looked like a catalog or something, like from a wholesaler. And I put it in a stack and left it there for like maybe a month and a half or two or something like that. Okay. This is so funny. I've got my props here for this. I have some of the stuff. One day, I was a Monday. I know it was a Monday. I got to the store and I, for some reason, was going through that stack of mail and got to that and I opened it up and I start pulling stuff out of it. And one of the first things I pulled out of it was this picture. There's a program from the first show in 1998, the Carl Wilson tribute concert, autographed by one Mr. Billy Hinchy. To Matthew, congratulations.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, well, about then I was kind of
Yeah.
going, well.
What's going on here?
Then I pulled out this table topper that says Roxy Theater reserved to Matthew Hartz. Then I kind of really knew that something, I went, oh my gosh.
That was a big deal in that
Well,
envelope.
let me tell you, that was in October, and I can't remember what year it was. I've been trying to remember for sure what exact year it was. I had opened that on the Monday after the weekend. I was supposed to attend the Carl Wilson Foundation event and get to take advantage of this reserved table at the Roxy Theater.
Oh.
And I think I called, I think it's Betty Caligna, and I'd had the number because I'd talked to them before, and I called and immediately she goes, "Oh, Matthew, we wondered where you were. You didn't." And I was mortified.
Oh my gosh.
And they told me they had a bunch of stuff lined up to go around and check some stuff out, and I was beside myself. But almost had to laugh at the same time. But they made me promise. They said, next year you have to come. You have to come and plan on it, and which I did plan on. And I went the next year and had an amazing time.
Awesome.
That's
so cool.
They went out of there.
You were able to do it even though you missed
Yes,
that. That's awesome.
And I got to meet. It's where I met Alan Boyd and got to, he actually, after that, he came up to visit me in Boise, and I wasn't here. He came to visit the music store because he has a brother that lives here. Oh. And then I met a couple other guys, Mike Maris, lots of people, Jonah and Justin, just briefly, but just was there for the spirit of the event mainly. But I got to drive around and do a little bit of sightseeing on my own. I remember my wife and I at the time, I drove past the entrance to Bel Air and the gates were open. And we had rented a Durango, and it was brand new, a Dodge Durango back then. It looked okay, but immediately I got in that neighborhood, I realized I was underdressed with that Durango.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we're driving on that windy roads in that Bel Air neighborhood, and Bellagio. I knew I was on the road. Oh, wait a second. And I knew the number 10452, I think is what it is. I just knew it by heart from books. And I got to looking around on houses as we were driving around. I couldn't see any house numbers. And finally I looked, they were down on the curbs. And sure enough, by God, came around a bend, and there's that Edgar Rice Burroughs house. And Brian's not there anymore, right? They sold him a long time ago. But I stopped to get a picture, and the gate started opening, and here comes a guy in a blue shirt running as fast as he can remember. My wife, get in the car. So we got it. I snapped a picture real fast and jumped back into the jetted out of there.
Yeah.
And then went by and saw Dennis's place out on the end of Sunset, the Will Rogers estate, where he had been. Paradise Cove, I went there. That was special. Just all the album covers being there.
Right.
Man, that's a special spot. Beach Boy fans need to go to Paradise Cove when you're in LA for sure. In ending this episode, and this our final episode of the podcast series, I want
just the season. We'll be back.
Oh yeah, no, yes, exactly.
We got a lot to cover. Still.
I want to just reiterate for this episode just what an example Carl is. Study more about Carl Wilson if you don't know. Look up his interviews. You can learn a lot from this man, not just musically, but about being a human being. And I think that in Billy's documentary about Carl, that Here and Now, I think Brian, when he's interviewing Brian lets loose and gets really comfortable. And he says, he just said Carl was a better human being than the rest of us, on every level.
Yeah.
Whoa, okay, well, there you go. One touching thing that I've heard, and I hope that I don't step on toes by repeating this, because I know I saw it either in an interview with I think one of the boys, and they talk about going to see him in the end of his illness when it was real bad, and
what was the illness?
Cancer.
It was cancer.
Cancer, and then one of them said, Dad, you're my hero, and he just he said, no, you're my hero.
Yeah,
and I think that kind of says it all right there.
Kind of a testament right there.
Spreading love, hope, kindness till the very end. Just being that for everybody else.
Yeah.
Till it's done.
Yeah.
I have to say he was the one I wanted to meet more than even Brian.
Yeah.
That's why when we have Larry on and we talk about his interactions with Carl, and that was as close as I'll ever really get, probably on an intimate level. But I always tell people he was the one I wanted to meet, but in the end, I didn't need to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got it all. Yeah, everybody else can still get it all. Just check out Carl Wilson.
Yeah.
And thanks everybody for listening to us on this maiden voyage of the podcast. It's been so much fun. We want to hear from you,
and don't just because we're taking a break here, don't stop following on the social media and YouTube, and then we have Patreon as well, where if you really want to continue to follow, those bonus podcasts still got to happen. So if you want to get on Patreon, if you really don't want to wait, just hop on a Patreon page and support, and then you can learn how to play music there, Beach Boy tunes as well. So that's going to do it for this episode and this season. So yeah, this is, we need a little applause drop here because we're finishing here.
Happy 60th anniversary to the Beach Boys. The smile that you send out returns to you.